Lottie-dottie, we like to party. Yeah. We don't cause trouble. We don't bother nobody. We're just some men that's on the mic. And then we walk up on the mic, we rock the mic. Right? Yeah, yeah. Yo, Renegade Culture, Hip Hop History Month. What's good?
Yo, what's good, everybody? How y'all doing? This is Kamau K. Franklin.
Minister Server.
And we got
the ear doctor. The doctor.
John Bryan is high as hell. I was like, oh, he's slow as a motherfucker.
He's flowing.
He's flowing. He's doing his thing. Yo, and if y'all notice, you know, our brother Kalonji is not here.
Where's Kalonji?
I got a call earlier. He said he was on his way, but his bicycle broke down, so he couldn't make it and shit again. You know what I'm saying?
I told you, man, you got to get one of them scooters or Uber or something.
Something, nigga. You got to step up, man. Tell your moms to give you a bigger allowance, and you can get down here.
I got you again. Because we all family, so I got you, yo.
True. How about we get him a big wheel?
Yo, that's what he needs.
That's what he needs.
That's what he needs. We got you, Kalonji.
I can see him on the highway pedaling and shit. Pedaling, you know what I'm saying?
Cussing out folks and shit.
Exactly. Yo, so tonight we got a real special, deep show tonight. We're going to be talking about U.S. Empire. Yeah. Our two special guests that we're going to have on is Akuno and Ajamu Baraka, who are going to rock the mic and talk about U.S. international affairs, U.S. hegemony, what's happening in terms of the empire, and where is the left in the United States to challenge U.S. hegemony.
Yes, because what you have to understand is that the empire, no matter who is the head of the empire is the empire.
Mm-hmm. So we Renegade Culture, we're going to be back, boom.
Renegade Culture.
Yeah. Yo, this is Renegade Culture. I'm the ear doctor, and this is your quick mix fix right here. Let's go.
To microphone in the zone of the sea of power, and him and all you pussy. To microphone in the zone of the sea of power, and him and all you pussy. Black business. Because I come to fill your cups again. One of me was a youth that has to truck a top again. People pick some person like a teacher to go tear shit. Roots rock reggae, still some don't understand. That's I keep it, I got this thing going on, and God's taking form. What is flesh, what is born? And all of a sudden, every jumping rap is hot and starting something. Culture keep the buffing coming. Cause I'm curing sick. No people project life, I'd like to say was all that. Just not for frontin', we're dying in these shacks. We don't care. I swear that I go kill them. Slavery made them rich, then they ditched us in project. Look at this godliness. Who is that? What is this? Wise intelligence, and I got the black business.
You listening to the ear doctor, okay?
Now let's get back to the show.
Thinking of a master plan. Because ain't nothing but sweat inside my hands. So I dig into my pocket, all my money
spent.
So I dig deeper. It's still coming up.
With red.
So I stop the mission, leave my residence, thinking how can I
get some dead presidents.
I need money.
I used to be a stick-up kid,
so
I think of all the devious I did.
Oh! Yo, you muddled on one line.
Hey, and you messed up.
I didn't fuck up at all.
It's supposed to be lint.
You said rent.
It's supposed to be lint, not rent. You're right.
That's why it's Hip Hop History Month.
Oh, damn.
Come on, man.
I take the blame for that.
It's all good.
Yeah. So, yo, we got some special guests, and you know, they all hip-hop heads, you know what I'm saying?
Heavyweights,
you know what I'm saying? Heavyweight, grassroots activists, organizers, folks I've known for a long time, I've done plenty of work with. So I want to start off with the intros. First, we got Akuno, who's the co-founder and director of Cooperation Jackson. Kali has been the co-director of the U.S. Human Rights Network, executive director of People's Hurricane Relief Fund. Kali's a writer, organizer, activist, all around, like, close family. Brother Kali, how you doing, bro?
I'm doing all right tonight.
Good.
Doing all right.
Word, and we got another guest up here, Ajamu Baraka. He is a political activist and associate fellow at the Institute of Policy Studies. He is also a former Green Party nominee for Vice President of the United States of America in 2016 election and currently serves as the national organizer and spokesperson for the Black Alliance for Peace.
Thank you, brothers, for being on. We appreciate it. You know what I'm saying? All right.
How you doing, Ajamu?
I'm doing well. I'm really glad to be here. I've been watching this, this podcast and wondering why I never got an invitation. So I consider this to be the affirmation that I finally arrived.
That's right. You know what? I'm glad that you waited till we got on air to say that too. Get him.
You'll be on the next 5 podcasts in a row and shit like that. You know what I'm saying? So we brought y'all on to talk about U.S. empire, basically. One of the things that we haven't always got too deep on, but we really need to, with this new election that just happened, Biden, the possible president-elect, whether or not your boy leaves office or not. So we got Biden replacing Trump. And our first question that we want to open up with, I'm going to start with you, Ajamu, is what do you think are the sort of the nuances and the differences between what a Biden presidency may look like compared to what Trump may look like, what Trump was in terms of his presidency?
One, I think there's going to be a shift in rhetoric. The Biden administration will frame their policies in a much more sophisticated and comprehensive way. But in terms of secondly though, in terms of substance, clearly the Biden forces represent a different class faction of the bourgeoisie. The Biden forces are representing the finance and transnational corporations, the globalists, if you will, versus the economic nationalists, the big U.S.-based capital that supported Donald Trump. So there will be a shift in that focus. But what will kind of connect up both of those elements is a recognition, not a recognition, but a commitment on the part of capital to allow the Democrats to come in and clean things up, in particular around the issue of fiscal policy. They're going to use the trillions of dollars that were dedicated to prop up the economy as a consequence of COVID to have a wholesale attack on what, as Kali talked about a little earlier, the last remnants of the so-called welfare state, the services that are still in place to provide some degree of relief to working class people in this country. It's going to be a severe campaign of austerity imposed at every level of government to basically deal with the so-called debt. So austerity is going to be straight up on the agenda globally. It's going to be a continuation of aggressive policies, but even perhaps more aggressive. I suspect they're going to end up escalating tensions between the U.S. and North Korea. They're going to continue the escalation of tensions between China and the U.S. They're going to continue with their expansion on the African continent. So it's going to be straight up strengthening the interests of U.S. empire, which means basically the strengthening and advancement of white power.
And Kali, what do you see the nuances between a Trump regime, something that we look upon as sort of more overt white supremacy, the sort of American first idea, and Biden coming in terms of like foreign policy or U.S. empire and how it operates?
I mean, I don't have no disagreement with what Ajamu laid out, none. Maybe just add on a couple of things. Biden and them, I think, are going to come harder actually at Venezuela. They're going to do more to block, I think, Bolivia in the transition is trying to make back. Folks got to remember most of the undermining pieces that got set in place both in Brazil and Bolivia and other parts of South America, those traps were laid by the Obama administration, going back to him supporting several coups, Uruguay, Honduras, etc. Exactly. So that police is going to go right back in play, to put their interests right back in command and try to reassert the Monroe Doctrine. That's part of, what Ajamu was just saying, reestablishing order and getting things back to normal, so all the little black and brown people, south of the border, get their ass back in line. Stop messing with China, stop thinking that there's going to be some alternative way that this thing is going to go. That's the game that that's basically being played. The other things that they're going to go back, I think, not with the same level of frontal assault on Iran, but they're going to come back, with their attempted kind of a regime sanctions, but they're going to use the ground that they think that Trump laid. Don't think that, be a little different language, but they feel that they're in a better position now than they were, and they're going to use that. They're going to keep pressing the war on Yemen. They're going to keep digging in deeper in terms of both expanding military bases and the different programs of extraction of raw materials on the African continent. So all that's going to continue. That's just going to step up. It's just a tactical shift and some shifts in priorities. The big thing that you probably see them do first and foremost is have all these new ceremonies with NATO, because that's the key cornerstone to their military dominance, that they got to kind of get that domino, back fully in place and get everybody on board and do all their little kissing and making up. And, we're sorry we left you hanging and we won't do that again, get back on board. That'll be one of the primary things that you can expect on the kind of the international level. And, the real issue for these liberals was what our brother Amos Césaire wrote a long time ago, Discourse on Colonialism. To the extent that they were really afraid of this cat, they were just afraid that he was going to apply the methods, normally reserved for us inside the empire, and for those folks who, live in subject and colonized positions on the external side of it, that he was going to bring that politics home. That's the only real fear. And what normal means is, that threat is removed from them. And it just goes right back to where it was normally placed, right back squarely on us. So that's the only thing that really is going to change. But, I'm going to keep saying my mantra. So to make it clear, the Democrats' particular objective in this period in time, I would say much of the last 30 years, their primary role within this whole joint is to make sure that the empire is protected, is preserved at all costs. That's their job. That's their function. So, as far as they're concerned, they in some better positioning relative to a few players. But, the show going to go on.
Right, which is why even the Biden-Harris ticket, that's why they was even put in place for the game to continue like that. Go ahead, Doug.
No, I was going to say, so we are also going to be joined earlier by Rosa Clemente, and she's trying to get in. Rosa, can you hear us? So I'm not sure if she can hear us. So we're going to try to bring her in on the next segment. Yeah. So Brother Ajamu, so, I don't know if you have some immediate commentary to some of the stuff that Kali laid out, but obviously some of the things that Trump represented was sort of, again, this American first, a particular hostility towards, the old school arch conservatives, hostility towards Iran, but also sort of a pulling back from putting more U.S. troops into different places. And that's something that the Democrats, particularly in the last few decades, let's say, relied on more in terms of expanding some of these wars that Bush started when he was in the House. So do you think that you're going to see more troops on the ground now that Biden becomes back in charge? Or you think there's going to be, this continuation of sort of drone warfare taking the lead now in terms of U.S., how they keep things in place?
And then also, just to add on to that, like I was watching today and they were talking about the whole Brexit, and how that's a big factor. Do you see that changing now with Biden coming in and pushing back as far as Trump and what's his name, Johnson over there was kind of palsing around together? So how do you think that's going to play out now with the Brexit being a big part of the EU?
Yeah, I think that well, let me deal with the second question first. I think that no, there won't be any changes right now in terms of the relationship between the U.S. And Europe. I think that the most changes that will take place, though, will be in the attitude toward the UK. The UK now finds itself sort of hung out there with the defeat of Donald Trump because, they had depended on it reestablishing a so-called special relationship with the U.S. in order to offset whatever economic fallout they would experience by disconnecting somewhat from the EU. Now there will be sufficient pressure on the UK to find some accommodations with the EU to make sure that it is able to protect its interests in this changing situation now that Biden's back in place. Because Biden's objective is to try to reestablish the pan-European, pro-Western colonial project with the U.S. at the head of it. So they want to try their last chance at trying to reestablish some degree of European global control. And so the French and the Germans are somewhat amenable to that, even though the Germans have some contradiction, because they understand that they are the predominant power on the European continent. Mm-hmm. So the Biden forces have been floating the idea of reintroducing the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And that is being reintroduced because the Trans-Pacific Partnership was going to be the foundation for then moving toward and finalizing the Transatlantic Investment Partnership, which was going to be the mechanism by which U.S. capital was going to be able to really assert its hegemony across the European market. So they are bringing back the agenda that they wanted to implement in 2016 if Hillary Clinton would have won. They're bringing back that neoliberal global agenda. And the problem we have is this, that there's going to be very little opposition to this agenda being imposed, because the left, they collaborated with the Democrats and are already weak. They have no standing. The liberal forces have been told, and they will be told very soon, that they cannot use any of their resources to engage in any kind of oppositional activity vis-a-vis the Democratic Party. So basically the only opposition would be out there would be the Trump forces, which would be a very significant opposition, because I'll argue that Donald Trump is now more dangerous outside of the state than he was in the state.
But hold on to that. When we come back from break, we want to pick up on that point. So this Renegade Culture, maybe if Rosa comes in, she'll join the conversation. But we hitting hard on international affairs and U.S. empire. We're going to be right back.
Renegade Culture, bo, bo, bo.
Runaway slave, a runaway slave, I'm a runaway slave, a runaway slave, I'm a runaway slave, a runaway slave, I'm a runaway slave, living life on the run.
Well, excuse me, take a few minutes to mellow out. Big Daddy Kane is on the mic and I'ma tell about a minimum length, the rhymes of strength and power. So listen to the men of the hour.
Oh,
yeah.
Big Daddy. It was almost like he was in the studio with us, you know what I'm saying?
Almost.
A little bit.
Hip Hop History Month, y'all. Renegade Culture. You know we got to bring it to you.
You know what I'm saying? This is Kamau K. Franklin.
Minister Server.
And
The ear doctor.
Ja. I think Ja's high. I want to talk about this shit, but I'm just saying though. And our special guests, we got Akuno, we got Ajamu, Baraka, and just to let folks know, so we were trying to get in Rosa Clemente, but she was having technical difficulties, so we're going to set up another show to have her on.
No doubt.
But we wanted to start back up and pick back on Ajamu's point. He was starting to get into Trump and talking about how Trump was going to be even more dangerous potentially outside of the U.S. presidency as opposed to being the U.S. president. So what do you mean by that, Ajamu?
Basically now that he doesn't have the constraint of the U.S. state, then now with him being outside of the state, he will be able to devote some attention, and now they have enormous resources too, of course, to actually organizing that disorganized movement that we were all afraid of because they represented so-called neo-fascists. But that movement was disorganized, and it was not in a position to really challenge, in my opinion, the power of the neoliberals who control the U.S. state. But now with Trump being outside, he's going to build a movement. Trump would be the second most powerful, if not the most powerful individual in the U.S. because Trump and Trumpism is not going anywhere. And so with a 70 million person base, with an organized apparatus, and with the enormous influence he will still be able to have on the Republican representatives, he will be a force to contend with. Now, your first question in terms of whether or not we're going to see, going back to what Biden might be representing in office in terms of foreign policy, whether or not we'll see massive troops on the ground and more aggression in that way, no. The U.S. is committed to, they understand the mistakes they made when they got strung out with trying to fight two wars at one time. You know, the arrogance of white supremacy. And so they re-embraced the Rumsfeld doctrine, which was repackaged and called the Obama doctrine, by concentrating and being dependent on the use of special forces. So they're not going to put troops on the ground, but they also have perfected another form of warfare, and that is economic sanctions. As long as they are able to impose draconian economic sanctions, then basically, why do you need to exercise? Why do you need to commit military force when you can basically cause death and destruction using sanctions?
And so, Kali, do you like drone warfare has now been the specialty, so mixed in with economic sanctions and then targeted killings has now sort of been the sort of preferred method of maintaining empire, particularly in places like the Middle East, and now starting in Africa. And Africom has now started to become even sort of more, I say, prominent in terms of U.S. foreign policy. Finally, they got an African nation to decide to house it there. What do you see is going to be sort of the role of Africom under Biden in terms of its use in Africa coming up?
I mean, I think its first primary use is going to be migration control, first and foremost, in a real practical sense. Trying to stop, the literal flood of our folks who are running from climate change, and all of the, particularly in the Sahel region, and all the civil strife that's coming with that, that's directly associated with that. In terms of a broader economic piece, they're really coming up short in a lot of ways. On the economic front, where the kind of major, at least political advances on the continent, I think are still being made, are largely by the Chinese, because the Chinese are talking long-term infrastructure development. It's got its contradictions, of course, but folks have been waiting for trains, been waiting for highways, been waiting for new wells, been waiting for all those different things, which have fundamentally been blocked, by the West, by the IMF in particular, going back to the 1970s. And so, how the Chinese have been coming in with their own particular kind of brand of debt financing and quote unquote loan forgiveness. That's far more attractive. And so where Africom is basically is to disrupt a lot of that. But it's not like it's offering a great deal of economic degrees or incentives. But we also shouldn't get confused, because it's going to take the Chinese a while to actually match the real level of investment that the Europeans and the Americans already have in the continent, right? So part of this whole thing, you see like the economists and all these other folks, talking about the Chinese are the new colonial power on the continent. If you actually add up the numbers, it's like, this block to my arm, in terms of concrete reality. So the Chinese are employing a much different tactic and a much different route, which over the course of time, I do think will have more traction and more gain. Just for good or bad, folks are saying, you're going to let me do what I want to do and you're just not going to interfere as long as you get to build a road and have your little town. I'll go with that than messing with these folks, these other folks. But there is a real, a piece that Europe and the United States really do not have an answer for, is this migration question, and how that's going to accelerate. And despite what people think about a more kind of kind and benevolent Europe, its reaction to our folks from the continent, from South West Asian region and East Africa has been militarized, and that's only increasing. Particularly looking at some of these recent deals that the Greeks just made, with Turkey. Italy's got warships out patrolling the coast, got the backing of most of Europe on that. So that's a particular piece that I think NATO is going to have to come around and regroup and be once again a kind of a new linchpin of their thinking. And I think Africom is going to get pulled into that. And one of the primary reasons I think it's going to get pulled into that is how they're going to have to manage the contradictions that they done unleashed in Libya, and then all the new fields of investment, in particular France has been putting into Algeria and Morocco around oil, gas, and water exploration. So Africom is going to be directly pulled into their orbit, I think, in that particular way.
All right.
Which is not about economic development, but long-term energy and resource security.
Yeah. Let me stop you there, because Ajamu, I know your organization is doing a lot of work on this. So what do you see as the particular dangers of sort of the extension of Africom right now?
The complete subordination of the African continent to U.S. and European imperialism. Africa represents now the new front for attempting to rescue global capital, which is interesting because it was a scramble for Africa in the 1870s to 1880s as an attempt to try to salvage the contradictions of the colonial capitalist system that led to the First World War, because it couldn't be salvaged. And now here we are 130 years later, and to try to salvage the global colonial capitalist system, now we're back in a scramble on Africa, or in Africa. So, the U.S. has embraced a policy for how to deal with Africa. This is military centered, as opposed to the incentives and the relationships, as Kali laid out, that the Chinese are involved in with African states. And so it makes their approach much more dangerous for African people, because you have a number of corrupt African states that don't mind that alliance with the U.S., who have demonstrated that in the fact that you have military-to-military relations between the U.S. and 53 up to 54 African states. That you have a 1,900% expansion of Africom on the African continent under Obama, and continued through Trump. So the militarization of the continent, war and death and destruction is on the agenda for the African continent. Real quick, you have been watching the stories coming out of Mozambique and the so-called jihadists that are involved in Mozambique. We predicted that 4 years ago. Why Mozambique? Why ISIS in Mozambique? Well, because off the coast of Mozambique, you have one of the largest deposits of gas in the world. So liquefied gas is the prize. And so you destabilize the state. You create a situation where they feel compelled to have to bring in the U.S. to help them with their jihadist problem, and you have the expansion of U.S. influence in Mozambique, and meaning across the southern part of the continent, with Uganda and Rwanda doing their thing in the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
So where does the African Union stand as far as how they're dealing with the onslaught of Africom in the different countries? In 53 countries they have relationships now. How's the African Union dealing with that onslaught?
What you mean dealing? What you mean? You mean wheeling and dealing?
They're dealing all right. Yeah.
Yeah, they're dealing. They're wheeling and dealing. That's about it.
Wow. Crazy.
So go ahead. Yeah, finish.
No. I mean, for the you just got variants of corruption and capitulation on most of the continent now. You know, the revolutionary movements that ushered in the era of kind of national independence either done went corrupt or you know, most of their leadership really, in truth, got taken out in the 1980s. You know, a lot of that got liquidated a long time ago. So you got opportunists upon opportunists now who are trying to mediate, you know, things. Now there's some elements of the resurgent left that you kind of hear and see, you know, at least that I can follow from the English press, not up on the French press as much. But, you know, you still got some folks in Tanzania, you know, trying to hold the line, Kenya, Nigeria, and a few folks I see here and there in Africa, but I mean, in Ghana, but it's still small, incoherent. I think the EFF is probably the most vocal in the OAU right now, kind of trying to hold some line, but again, very small force. They loud, but they still small.
Mm-hmm. You know, if I could jump in for a second, to give you an example of how something small and relatively insignificant in the scheme of things can be used as a motivating force for actually galvanizing left forces. And that is what happened, what unfolded in Nigeria with the SARS rebellion and the heavy-handed response from the Nigerian government. That situation, you know, goes to the issue we're talking about now, Africom, and the political issue that Brother College just raised. On Africom, it was the Nigerian military that along with the police force, that of course put down that resistance. The Nigerian military has been trained by the U.S. They're part of the Africom relationship between Nigeria and the U.S. The Nigerian police forces have been trained by the U.S. There's an international police training academy in Washington, connected to the State Department, that's been responsible for training police forces across the planet. They trained the Nigerian police. So the people in Nigeria made those connections. They understood that they're not just fighting the Nigerians, they're also fighting the U.S.
Right.
Politically, you know, the forces that came together to try to resist and ended up being shot down, they represent the left in Nigeria. But as a consequence of that heavy-handed response, there's been meetings across the continent now. We were able to host, that is BAP, a series of these meetings. We have one tomorrow, as a matter of fact, 9 o'clock in the morning, of left forces from literally across the continent who have not only expressed solidarity, but now there's this elevated conversation around how do we build an integrated, organized left movement on the African continent. So sometimes you have, you know, one spark, you know, can set things off, and I think Nigeria might be something that's really significant.
Okay, so we're about to take a final break, and when we come back, we want to talk about, even it's kind of weird based on so far this conversation, but also, are we seeing a declining U.S. empire, and if so, who's battling U.S. empire for supremacy? And something Ajamu brought up earlier, where are sort of left liberal forces in the United States to battle sort of U.S. hegemony domestically? Because you talked about folks' connection to the Democratic Party, so we want to explore that a little bit more when we come back on Renegade Culture.
Yeah, yeah. When you say you love me, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It goes into my head as just
Chit
chit-chatter.
chatter.
You may think it's egotistical or just fancy-free, but what you say, I take none of it
Seriously.
seriously.
Yeah.
Renegade culture, take it seriously.
Bam!
Hip-hop,
Oh, my man dropping
hip-hop.
rhymes, you know what I'm saying?
Hip-hop history month, you know we got to get it in for the people.
I know, I feel like it's like 1980 all over again up in
Man,
this
you
bitch,
know
you know
what
what
I'm
I'm
saying?
saying?
Plus we got the heavyweights on here, so we got
I
to get
know.
on to the classic, you know what I'm saying?
True. And Kylie got all those albums, I know that for
I'm
a
sure,
fact, you know what I'm
I'm
saying?
sure. Come on now.
So yeah,
Well,
we want to pick back
true.
up. We got our special guests, Ajamu, Baraka, and Kali Akuno. We want to thank them for coming on.
doubt.
We're going to hit back into the conversation. So when we left, we wanted to pick back up on U.S. empire. So we all know that U.S. empire is still dominant. European, U.S. combined sort of control vast amount of resources. They control the economy of the world, obviously military hardware, so forth and so on. But there are challenges that are happening that seems to be suggesting that there's a shift. And you, Kali, I think you brought up some of this earlier talking about China. So there seems to be an emergence of China, a somewhat reemergence of Russia. I'm not saying these are obviously revolutionary forces by any stretch of the imagination, but they are challenging U.S. hegemony, which may create some openings again for either local organizing, some states to sort of creep out or play each other against each other. So what do you see as sort of like the, relatively speaking, the long-term sort of reign of U.S. empire? And I'll start with you this time, Kali. The long-term reign of U.S. empire over the next 20 years or so forth.
20 years?
You 20, 30 years? How long you want to go?
How long will the empire last?
Well, I mean, the signs of ecological collapse are rapidly approaching. Rapidly approaching. They're here. And these folks are not planning on no major course correction. I mean, that's abundantly clear at this point. The Chinese are a little bit ahead of the game on that front, or at least seeing the long-term need for some alternative energy sources. But they baked into the petrochemical hydrocarbon cycle of production as well. They there. So we in for some rough times overall, not just about the empire. I think just about the level of economic output that the capitalist system basically cannot live without, and the ecological limits, and then where that's going to fracture within this system between it not being able to meet a core set of material needs and have to continue to resort, with extraction without the pretense of democracy. So all this people, worried about fascism, I think the people, I think a lot of that was being said in such a way that was rhetorically helpful for the liberals, but actually not accurate, in a number of fundamental ways. But what we do have, basically is, and you see it on a global scale, the capitalist system basically just eliminating any pretense of having to operate by democratic means in order to make ends meet. And this has been going on long before Trump came on the scene on a global scale. So this problem is going to continue. Whether the U.S. is going to be able to perpetuate its kind of role as cop/promoter of democracy for that much longer in this context, I think is not going to last that long. I mean, I agree with Ajamu on a number of fronts that we need to come back. I think it just needs to be a particular show about how the right, I'm going to say it beyond Trump, but how the right is going to use this next 4 years to press the empire further to the right, much further to the right than what it already is. And I think not only capture the state, the U.S. state back, but I think we'll do so on this basis of, y'all don't need to vote no more. We're going to make sure that don't really happen through all the institutional means at our discretion to make sure that the outcomes that we want are set in place. And remember, they already got some good things already in hand to ensure minority government for at least the next 2 years, with the Supreme Court on lockdown and basically the Senate on lockdown. So That's where we at.
Yeah,
in short, there's a lot more that could be said, but that's where we at.
So Ajamu, I want to let you jump in on that question too. So where do you see U.S. empire? Do you see it declining over the next 20 to 30 years? Do you see these rivals giving space for more radical revolutionary movements in between to have more operating room? Where do you see the U.S. empire going?
Toward fascism. I don't give it 30 years. Basically, the contradictions that are sharpening today, which are the contradictions that have been sharpening for the last 4 decades, have gotten to a point where either there's going to be a fascist reform, and let's remind ourselves, fascism is a capitalist reform. So because of the legitimation crisis that is deepening, the political legitimation crisis, the ideological crisis, the state is going to be more and more dependent on the use of force and violence. So this is something almost objective because, the economy is not going to recover. The more than 100,000 small and medium-sized businesses that have gone out of business that are coming back, the millions of people who are currently unemployed, many of them are not ever going to have a job again.
Right.
Our people who are located at the bottom rungs of the economy, we got to remember, even before this current crisis, we had among youth between 18 and 24, we had astronomical unemployment rates of 60, 70, 80%. So, we are facing a dire situation, and the general working class is facing a dire situation. So no, there will have to be either a revolutionary process unfolding, real radical change, real radical reforms, or you're going to have a fascist response to this declining economic situation that the ruling class finds itself in.
So on that note then, let's switch to something that you brought up earlier, something I think all of us have discussed in different ways. So the U.S. left, U.S. radicals or so-called radicals, liberal left, sometimes I like to call them. Some of them, particularly sided with or decided, obviously, in their minds, they're pushing Trump out, but they did the bidding, let's say, a lot of times of Joe Biden in terms of supporting that, right? And even though I think there has been some openings to talk more explicitly about Palestine and supporting Palestine as one opening within, Khalid's already shaking his head that it's not true, but I've seen more public stuff here in the U.S. I'm not saying it's gotten anywhere, but I've seen it. Where do you see the sort of the left forces, black radical forces, in terms of challenging, let's say, empire as it goes into this next phase of operation? And I'm going to start off with you, Khalid, because you had
also, just to add on that, and what are some of the things that we should be doing to challenge those forces?
Khalid, why don't you start, and then we're going to let Ajamu join in. Since you shook your head so much.
Yeah, I'm gonna shake my head hard on that one because the forces that you described, A, barely exist, and B, are deeply entrenched within the Democratic Party. And any real resistance is not going to come from the so-called organized forces. I think, the Floyd Rebellion, I think, has demonstrated that. That came from more, the real heat came from more unorganized forces. And the organized forces came behind it, trying to capture that motion.
Always, right.
But in terms of mounting a real resistance, that's not going to come from the quote unquote organized forces right now in this country. Now, the good thing is those organized forces don't speak for the vast majority of the masses, and cannot. The weakness of those forces are unfortunately not organized, but that also means, at least in the short term, they're not trapped up in the payola scheme. They're not trapped up in the patronage scheme. So they actually have a lot more maneuverability, at least in the short term. Now, vision, structure, capacity to carry something out is going to be questionable. But, I think the flare-ups will definitely move. But look, I mean, this country has been moving steadily to the right since 1968. And every election, you know, you can go back even further than that, actually. Not like this thing was ever left in any critical sense, even by their own definitions of that term. But, you know, this kind of triage politics of we got to hold our nose and, you know, go with the less bloody shirt, as brother Gerald Horn, you know, lays out. That's been clear since '68. And people saying that, you know, we're just going to do this for Biden, that's a bold-faced lie. You know, folks was baked into that long before Trump showed up on the scene. And the next election is going to be the most dangerous election because the next time around, you know, 4 years from now, they probably have, I would say, you know, they are going to, the right is actually going to learn, I think has already done a tremendous amount of learning from the Trump experiment. And they're going to have somebody, you know, with the same political, they're going to resurrect John Wayne or some new form of Ronald Reagan, you know, who can say all the mean-ass shit with more clarity and less, you know, vile racist rhetoric, but mean it just as well, but will actually know how to govern, right? And actually know how to make certain compromises. So I think they're going to get, you know, more keen on this. And what we're going to see in the short term is a lot of the forces in this Democratic Party fold that got on this bandwagon of, you know, anybody but Trump. They're going to be trying to discipline us. Those of us in this conversation in the short term, and you already saw it. I mean, the man hadn't even, the cop and Biden hadn't even fully got all the announcements on the networks yet. And they started going after the progressives in their own formation to discipline them even before the ink was dry. You know, so if they own it this early, you know, just imagine what they're going to do come April, May, when there's millions of more folks who've been pushed out of their houses. COVID-19, you know, is still going to be raging. They're going to have to try to get any grip on to shut the economy down. But, you know, as Ajamu was laying out, they're not going to offer no major stimulus package. Again, not in the sense of what they laid out in, what was that, June. They're not doing that again.
Let me stop you
so the contradictions from the base is going to keep going up. They don't, and nobody has an answer for that. We just need to be real about that.
So, Ajamu, why don't you jump in and tell us what's your analysis of like sort of left liberal forces in the United States, particularly to challenge U.S. hegemony overseas?
I think that as colleague laid out, the left forces in the U.S. are too disorganized, and I would add corrupted, to engage in an effective opposition. I mean, corrupted ideologically, corrupted culturally, you know, and politically. That basically we saw with the arguments that were made for why it was important to collaborate with the Democrats. They went beyond just politics. It was a strange kind of positions that they were arguing that they really, to me, demonstrated that we have a lot more pro-U.S. Forces among the left that people might want to recognize. The politics of sentimentality, the way people frame things, threats to our democracy. What? When do we get a democracy?
Right.
You know, our country. You know, look, I'm gonna tell you, since we are on this program, I think that the lesser of two evil is a petty bourgeois, unprincipled position. How can any self-respecting African revolutionary embrace a lesser of two evil strategy? You know, that is backwards. So as long as that kind of a position can gain any kind of legitimacy, it really reflects the level of corruption we have to deal with within the so-called left. So no, we've got to build a left with a clear vocabulary that cannot be co-opted by the state. If we're not talking about the absolute necessity for building an anti-capitalist opposition We're not talking about envisioning a socialist transition, a socialist transformation in clear terms. We're going to miss the move of the people, the young folks out there who they're not ready to compromise. They don't want to compromise. They're ready to fight. But we need
They got to let them
formation.
compromise.
Exactly. They need an organized force that can galvanize that energy into something that's really effective. So, you said 30 years, and I said, no, I don't see it. These contradictions are come to a head within this decade. Okay. Now, it may not be a complete revolutionary transformation, of course, but the contradictions of the economy are deepening so critically that it can't hold. It can't hold more than a few more years. As Khalid just said, think about where we're going to be at by June, when the economy continues with they're unable to absorb all of the unemployment. No, this is the most critical moment in the history of this republic, and I'm just so happy that I'm still here because we are seeing the beginning, the real beginning of the end.
No, so on that note,
Wow.
I want to thank both Khalid Akuno, Ajamu Baraka for coming on and laying it down straight on U.S. hegemony and empire. It was great to have y'all on. As we said, Rosa Clemente tried to join us. We're going to have her on at another time. But thank you, brothers, so much for coming on, and you will be on a lot more in the future. So before we go, if folks wanted to contact you guys in terms of your social media or know more about your organizations, Ajamu, we'll start with you. Where can they go to find out more?
Please go to blackallianceforpeace.com. And if you want to talk about and struggle against Africom, go there and join us in our No Compromise, No Retreat campaign to defeat the war against African people in the U.S. and abroad.
Yeah.
And Khalid Akuno, how can folks contact you guys?
To reach me directly, just hit me up on Facebook, Khalid Akuno, or email khalidakuno@gmail.com for a segment of our mass work that we're trying to do to build at least a material base to launch a long-term struggle against. You want to check out Cooperation Jackson website, cooperationjackson.org, and then Co-op Jackson on Twitter, Instagram, and Co-op Jackson on Facebook. For all these folks who like to get into those entanglements.
Yo, sir, thank y'all for coming out. We appreciate having y'all.
Appreciate y'all dropping those jewels, man. The people need to hear that kind of info that you're not getting anywhere else except Renegade Culture. Okay,
we out.
That's right. Thank you.
Get y'all raps together, man. Practice your raps.
Damn.
You got something to spit?
What you want to battle? What's up?
Let it go. Renegade Culture, we be back. Boom, yo, we back. Thank y'all for a great show, Renegade
dope
Culture.
show, man.
I
It
know.
was dropping jewels, bro.
I feel like there was like some heavy hit. It was like a somber Renegade Culture show.
Hey, but you know what? These are somber times, man.
That's
This
true.
is serious time. And only Renegade Culture are you getting information like that,
That's
bro.
right, yo. And we bring it to such a wide audience. We want to make sure our fans check us out. You can get us on SoundCloud,
Spotify,
renegadeculture.org,
Playback TV.
You know what I'm saying? You can get us on, what else is out there? Apple.
Everything.
Anywhere you want the Flyers podcast, you're going to find Renegade Culture.
True that, true. And so we're going to be putting on a real Patreon because we're going to need the folks' support to keep this going. So look out, particularly on SoundCloud and some of our other places, to check out our Patreon. We're going to have different levels of support for folks.
Freedom ain't free.
Freedom ain't free. Freedom ain't free, yo. Help support.
And real quick, since it is Hip Hop History Month, I want to give a RIP out to the young brothers King Vaughn and Mo 3. They just got shot and killed. Another crazy, senseless thing going down. So RIP.
Yeah, RIP for that for sure, man. And yo, stop the violence for real again. 30 years later, it's time for another Stop the Violence movement.
Yeah. Headed for self-destruction.
You know what I'm saying?
Yo, Renegade Culture, yo, we be back next week with another episode.
Peace.
Did he just do the Wakanda?
I do that now. I don't know why I keep doing the Wakanda and shit, yo.
Peace.